Hey guys, so today I thought it would be fun to do a roundup of all the eyeshadow palettes that I tried in 2021 and do my best to rank them in order from my least favorite to my favorite. Now I feel like ranking any kind of makeup product is always pretty tricky because there's just so many different factors that go into it, especially with eyeshadow palettes. And in the past, I've had kind of like a ranking system where I had probably like 5 or so categories like color story, variety, packaging, different things like that, and I would like add up the score from each of those categories to determine my ranking. But I was thinking about doing that again this time, and I felt like it kind of just made it even more complicated, so I decided to just rank these based on my general feelings. I'm taking into account things like how often I used the palette, how much I like the formula, just all of those things together to give them my best ranking, but also just to share my thoughts on all these palettes. I tried 16 eyeshadow palettes this year, and I am including 2 quads in this roundup, so I don't know, I didn't realize I tried so many. That is actually the majority of my palette collection. That is more than half of the palettes that I own, so I don't really know how I managed to bring in that many new palettes this year, but I had fun playing with them all. So starting with my least favorite palette, and this palette is not a terrible palette by any means, but it is one of the ones that I think I reached for the least out of all of these, so that does tell me it's probably down there with my least favorites, and it's the CoverGirl True Naked Jet Setter Quad. I used this in my full face of CoverGirl video this year, and I think I've maybe used it 2 or 3 times outside of that, so haven't gotten a ton of use out of it. I do think this is a nice little quad. I just think the quality of these shadows feels very drugstore. I've never been that impressed by CoverGirl shadows. I used to have their True Naked Roses palette, I think, and I ended up decluttering that because it just was kind of meh for me. I definitely think it's helpful to use like a glitter primer underneath these shimmers because otherwise they're just very dull shimmers, but I'll have to maybe try to roll this into my makeup basket at some point soon to get some use out of it because I just have not been giving this very much love. So that was, I guess, 16. Coming in at number 15 is another drugstore palette, and this is the Profusion Pastel palette. I also did a video on this palette when I first got it. This is a nice little selection of pastels, and for $5, I think you do get some nice unique shades. What I found is that I think Profusion really does best with their shimmers, so I would recommend picking up any of their palettes that have shimmers in them because I do feel like their mattes are a little bit lacking, at least in their 10 pans. A lot of these shades do require quite a bit of building. They are kind of sheer, and I think part of that is just because they're pastel, they're lighter by nature, so it can be a little bit of a challenge to get them to pop. I do like to wear them over the NYX Jumbo Pencil in Milk. That kind of does help them pop a little bit better. The other complaint that I had about this is that it has 3 blues in it, and they're all obviously pretty similar to each other. I mean, they're not identical, but they're similar enough that I'm kind of wishing they'd put something a little bit different to replace maybe one of those blues, but overall, it's not a bad palette, it just doesn't stand out to me. Number 14 is one that I honestly just didn't get a whole lot of use out of, but I'm hoping to get more use out of it in 2022. It's the Estate Hidden Garden palette. This they launched this year. Estate is kind of an indie Canadian brand, and I am on their PR list, so they sent me this and another one of their palettes at the same time this year. This is a really pretty color story. For some reason, I just didn't reach for this very much. I think I maybe used it 2 or 3 times, but the shades are really pretty. I do like the color story, and they do have good color payoff. For some reason, I just feel like this is a spring palette. It has something to do with like the green and the pink. Those just look like springy colors to me, so maybe this is something that I will get more use out of in 2022. I do think it's a really beautiful palette. They did a great job with it. I think I got it in the fall, and I was just gravitating towards some of my more like fall appropriate palettes, so that's probably why I haven't gotten a ton of use out of this, but it's not a bad palette at all. At number 13, we have the Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette. And I don't dislike this palette either. I mean, I really don't dislike any of these. But again, this is just not something I have used a whole lot. I did a 3 looks 1 palette on this, and I've used it here and there throughout the year since then. I do feel like the formula of this is kind of average, as is the case for a lot of these naked palettes, at least the ones that I've tried. They're always just kind of somewhere in the middle for me. They don't wow me. The shimmers are just kind of there, you know? They're not super impressive to me, and that's usually the thing that makes me love a palette is amazing shimmers. The mattes are fine. I do like the mix of colors. I don't know what it is about this palette that's made me not want to reach for it. I guess I just have a lot of great palettes in my collection that it's competing with for my attention, so that's probably why. So while I've created some looks with this that I've really enjoyed, it's not one that I feel like super attached to. Like I feel like if I lost it, I probably wouldn't go out and buy a replacement, and I probably wouldn't miss it that much, but at the same time I like having it in my collection. So number 12 is a palette that I was so excited to get, and I was a little bit let down. I still like it, but there are just a couple things about it that didn't quite live up to my expectations. This is the Klarity So Mermaizing palette. I was so jazzed about this palette when it first launched. I bought it, like I pre-ordered it, I was so excited. So this is a fully pastel palette. You've got half these duochrome shimmers and half mattes. And, you know, obviously this doesn't go very deep, so if you want a palette with like a lot of contrast to it, this is not it. But for me, this is just kind of like a staple pastel palette. I do really enjoy it, especially the shimmers. The shimmers are just ridiculously beautiful. Like I don't really have anything else quite like these in my collection. They are a little bit flaky. They've got almost like a creamy texture to them. A lot of indie brands I think have like shimmer shadows in a similar type of formula where you have to just barely tap your finger in and you get, you know, plenty of product, and then you just want to build it up slowly rather than like rubbing your finger back and forth, because then you're going to get way too much and then you're going to have a ton of fallout and flakes all over your face. So, but if you don't mind this type of formula, they are so beautiful, just sparkly, shifty, super pretty. The mattes in here I find a little bit chalky, and that's not just because they're pastel. I just feel like they're a little bit dry, and I kind of sometimes have trouble with them kind of looking a little bit skippy on my eyes. Definitely the NYX Jumbo Pencil in Milk, like a white eyeshadow base, is a must with these to get them to show up. They are true pastels, so you just want to know that going into it. But I have enjoyed this palette. I've gotten some really beautiful looks with it. Again, I do have a 3 looks 1 palette on this one. Any looks that I've done with any of these palettes, I'll go ahead and link for you below. And this is totally like a spring palette for me. I think this will be something I get a lot of use out of in the spring. Again, not something I'm reaching for a whole lot this time of year, but it is pretty. It's just got some drawbacks to it, so that's why it's ranked a little bit lower. All right, number 11, we have the ColourPop in a Trance palette. This is one that my friend Alex sent me. She was decluttering it from her collection, so she sent it to me. And this is another one that I just feel like I haven't reached for a whole lot this year, so that's why it's ranked a little bit lower, but I really do enjoy the quality of these shadows. These pastels I do prefer over the Klarity ones, and I do think this is a really fun color story. I need to make a point to use this more. There's really nothing wrong with the formula. And I really like the mix of like blues and purples in here. I think that's a fun combination. I guess these just aren't the kind of shades that I have been gravitating to this year, so that's why, again, I'm ranking it a little bit lower. It's so hard to rank palettes though. Like, I can't overthink it because then I'm gonna second guess myself and then I'll never film this video, so just take these rankings with a grain of salt. All right, number 10. I think this is the newest one to me. This is the one that I bought the most recently, and it's the Sigma Enchanted palette. This is not a new palette to the market. In fact, a lot of these aren't necessarily new to the market. Some of them came out last year, even the year before. If you watch my 1 week 1 palette with this, then you'll know I just have some mixed feelings on this formula. I don't know if Sigma's eyeshadow formula is my favorite of all time. The mattes can go on a little bit patchy, and they also have a tendency to blend away, so you have to kind of treat them differently, which, I don't know, I just kind of wish that weren't the case for a $49 palette. The shimmers in here, some of these shimmers are a little bit kind of blah to me, but some of them are stunning, like super sparkly foiled, like this gold, these 2 pinks. But then Metamorphosis, which looks like a really pretty kind of duochrome, almost like ColourPop glass bowl in the pan. It's just so dull to me, like it just doesn't have much anything to it, you know, so I have to like really build that up. So just kind of hit or miss for me in terms of the shades, but I do really like the color story of this, and I love how many different types of looks you can get with it. Yeah, I just wish that I liked the formula a little bit more, but I do still enjoy having this in my collection, and the more I've worked with it, the more it's grown on me, so I'll give it that. At number 9, we have another Estate palette that came out this year. This is their Mystic Forest palette, and when I first opened this up, when I first got it, I wasn't even sure if I was going to keep it because I thought it leaned a little bit too dark for me, but then I used it and I was totally wowed by it. I actually think this is such a fun and beautiful color story, especially for the fall. I love the like warm orangey mustard shades. This shade right here is so pretty. These two, the middle turquoise shade and then this like golden bronze shade, also feel like ColourPop Super Shock shadows, and those are beautiful. Look at those. Wow. The Hidden Garden palette, the other one that I showed, doesn't have any shades like that. They're all just like your typical powder shadows. My favorite shade is the shade Fairy Dust, the bronze. Unfortunately, these shades can kind of crease on your eyes, which I wish that weren't the case because they're so, so pretty. I have found that setting my eyeshadow primer with a powder does help, although it doesn't completely take away that problem, so that's why I'm not ranking it any higher. But I do love the color story. I love how foiled those two shades are, and I find the mattes very easy to work with as well. So also packaging, 10 out of 10. This is so beautiful. So I'm looking forward to seeing what else Estate does, because I feel like they've got some potential. Some of their past launches that I've tried I haven't been a huge fan of, and even like their eyeshadow quads that they had earlier this year, wasn't in love with those, but these 9 pans really did impress me. Even the Hidden Garden one that I did rank lower, I still think the quality is there for sure. All right, number 8. So this was the year that I discovered BH Cosmetics eyeshadows, and I am obsessed with BH Cosmetics now. This is their Lost in Los Angeles palette, and the formula of BH Cosmetics cannot be beat, especially for the price, but even not taking price into account, they're just really good shadows. If you haven't tried BH Cosmetics, what are you doing? They go on sale for like less than $10 pretty regularly, so even at full price they're pretty affordable, but wait for a sale and you can get a really good bargain. Lost in Los Angeles is another kind of mostly pastel palette. There's not a ton of depth with this one. So I was expecting to like this more than I do. The formula I love. It's totally on par with the other BH palettes that I've tried, but I do feel like the color story of this kind of throws me off a little bit. It's not the most cohesive. Like, I do have kind of a hard time coming up with a look with just this palette. Because the color story feels so almost random and scattered to me, I find it a little bit overwhelming to look at, and I guess this doesn't really serve as a standalone palette for me. Maybe it could, like maybe if I did a 1 month 1 palette or 1 week 1 palette with this, I would kind of figure out better ways to use it, but for now it just sort of serves as like a supplemental palette for me, and it does have a lot of nice pops of color that I don't really have elsewhere in my collection, so really just the color story that throws me off. I don't know. Does anyone else feel this way about it? Alright, number 7 was a total impulse purchase from Profusion. Profusion, they suck me in sometimes. I find them hard to resist because they're so inexpensive, but this is from their Beam It Up kit, and this was from their Halloween collection this year. It came with this palette and a little eyeliner that totally sucked. That eyeliner was a total waste. I kind of wish they would have just sold this on its own, but I was surprised by how much I like this palette. I like it more than the 10-pan palettes that I've tried from them, and it's funny because these did not swatch well at all, but they perform surprisingly well on my eyes, and I do think that this is just a fun, unique color story. I did a 2 looks 1 palette with this that I can link for you, but I got some really fun looks with it, and I just love the uniqueness of these shades. It's just a cute little palette, so I think that's a lot of fun, and I like that they did something different with their packaging too. I like the cardboard more than their like hard plastic packaging, so yeah, that was a win for me. Definitely not like my favorite palette of the year, but I like it. At number 6, we have another BH Cosmetics palette, and this is their Mimosa palette. This is one that, honestly, if I'd bought this more in like the spring, maybe I would have ranked this even higher, but I did buy it at the tail end of summer, and so I just haven't gotten a whole lot of use out of it this year. But I do think this is such a fun color story. I cannot wait to play with this in the spring and summer because that's when I get really into these shades. I always go through like a pink and peach phase in the spring, so just you wait, I will be rocking this palette. Surprisingly though, I did get some really beautiful fall looks with this too, with like the orange, the like reddish brown, some of these neutral shades down here, so there's a lot you can do with this. Again, quality, amazing. I mean, all the BH Cosmetics palettes, all 3 of them that I've tried, the formula has been very consistent across the board, so I'm really just judging it based on the color story and how often I use it. At number 5, we have another quad that I tried this year. This is from Athr Beauty, and it is their Ametrine quad. I really enjoy this for just an everyday quad. These are totally my kind of shades for, you know, a look that I would just throw on any day when I don't really want to think about my eyeshadow too much. All four of the shades perform beautifully. There's really two lid options for me, the rose gold and then this deeper bronze over here. I actually like that all over my lid, so I can really go in either direction if I want. Yeah, fun little quad. I think if you're wanting to try Athr Beauty shadows, this is great. All four of the shades are fantastic. All right, number 4, this is one of the palettes that I bought at the very end of 2020, so I'm including it in this video, but this is the Anastasia Sultry palette. I snagged this when they had like a sultry vault last year, and I got it on a really good sale, and I had just always wanted this palette, and because it was discontinued, they brought it back for like a limited time. I snagged it, and I'm really glad that I did because I do really enjoy this palette. I've always liked these Anastasia palettes that are in this packaging. I do feel like I didn't use it as much as I thought I would this year. I definitely did use it a good amount, but I don't know. I thought I was going to use it way more, and I think that's honestly just because I was prioritizing some of my older palettes this year, and I never got around to putting this in my 1 month 1 palette series, so I'm definitely going to make a point. I feel like I've said this for a lot of these palettes, but I definitely am going to make a point to reach for this more. This does definitely scream like holidays to me, like holidays, New Year's Eve, so this month I am definitely planning on using it quite a bit, and this is what I'm wearing today on my eyes. So I am really happy that I bought this. I think it definitely was a nice addition to my collection. All right, in the number 3 spot we have the Flower Jungle Lights palette. This is such a me palette. It's all shimmer, and as you know, I do love shimmers. These are all kind of like a cream formula, and they're all very foiled. A lot of great one and done. I guess I'm just swatching all of these. A lot of great one and done shadow looks in here. I feel like this palette appeals to me all year round. I don't really use this bottom purple shade. I just don't use deep purple shimmers. I just don't use them, but that's fine. I feel like I get enough use out of the other shades to still make this palette worth having. Yeah, these are just yummy. They're so good. It makes me want to try more from Flower Beauty. They've got they came out with another one of these this year called Desert Lights that the shades don't look that unique to me, so that's why I've held off on purchasing it, just because I have a lot of those kind of, you know, light rose gold champagne-y shades in my collection over and over again, but it does look really pretty, so maybe I'll pick that up eventually, but I love this. I'm very glad to have picked it up this year. Number 2 is one that I actually got for Christmas last year, so again, very end of 2020. It didn't make it into last year's end of year palette ranking video, so I am going to go ahead and include it here, but you probably already guessed. It's the Athr Beauty Rose Quartz palette, and unfortunately they discontinued this version of it this year. They did come out with a new version, but I love this palette. I've used it so much this year. I'm honestly surprised that I haven't hit pan on this shade. There's a huge dip in it though. This is just such an easy, effortless palette for me. The mattes blend like a dream. These are by far the most blendable mattes I own. These middle shimmers, I've said before, you do have to wear them over a glitter primer if you want them to really show up at their true potential. But when you do that, they are so stunning. And I just love reaching for this palette when I don't want to have to worry about blending, or when I just don't want to think about my eyeshadow too much. That's kind of what this is for. And I just think for fair skin, these shades are stunning. So I am so happy to have this in my collection. And then my number 1 palette, if you know my palette collection well, then you have probably already guessed which one it is by now, but it is my BH Cosmetics Summer in Saint-Tropez palette. This was the first BH Cosmetics eyeshadow palette that I bought this year, and it is the palette that started it all for me. I am now obsessed with BH Cosmetics, and I want to keep an eye on them to see what else they release, because I think they just have a great eyeshadow formula. This is the old packaging, but this is the only palette out of all of these that I've hit pan on. I have hit pan on the shade Sand, quite a bit of pan actually. So that is, for me, a telltale sign that this is a favorite. For me, this is just a perfect mix of muted shades and more colorful shades. This palette is a very approachable take on color. I don't always like to wear the brightest colors on my eyes, and this kind of pushes me out of my comfort zone in a way that I still feel very comfortable, you know? So I think if you're wanting to push yourself to play with more colorful eyeshadows, this is a great palette to go for, because it's just very, I don't know, it's very easy to work with. The shadows all perform beautifully, so I'm so happy to have discovered this palette this year, and it has now unleashed a monster. I can't believe I didn't try BH Cosmetics sooner, but I'm so glad that I tried them this year. That was one of my favorite discoveries of this year. So those are all the palettes that I tried in 2021. For some reason I almost said 2016. Girl. Again, it was very hard to rank these, but hopefully either way it was helpful for you to hear my thoughts on all of the palettes that I tried this year. I did not realize I tried this many. I feel like this is a ridiculous number of palettes to have brought into my collection. I'm definitely gonna have to slow it down next year, I think. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I will talk to you again tomorrow in my next video. Bye!